Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Lentini, and I'm your host for the podcast Different Thinking for Different Times. And today I have a guest, an extraordinary guest. And he's got a fascinating story about his work with psychedelics and how he's helping people, especially veterans, but he's helping people that are suffering with overwhelming anxiety and PTSD, depression, sadness. And there is some credibility to all of this work that's coming, not just from Matt's work. This is Matt Zemon, by the way, folks, not just from Matt's work, that it's starting to gain more traction, which I think anything that can help people expand from small-minded, what I call the acorn brain, small-minded thinking, and expand into limitless thinking, and to overcome some of these beliefs that we put boundaries around them. It's like we're in a castle and we're defending against the attack. And there aren't very many castles in most of my neighborhoods anyway. And in my mind, what I realized for myself was I had a lot of confirmation bias prior to being 50. And then the year that I turned 50, a month later, in fact, I flatlined. Mm-hmm. And so we won't go into that today, but I can tell you that what I did learn is, man, was my thinking small-minded, and what's possible is limitless, and not just in money or fame or glory, because a lot of that is BS, folks. It doesn't go with you. What goes with us is the good we do. That was all that was mentioned in my life review. And that upsets a lot of traditionalists who want to mark my sins down somewhere. And I had them, but it was not mentioned in my life review. Okay, so now I want to introduce Matt, and I'm going to just read a little bit. So he's the author of the best-selling book, Psychedelics for Everyone, a beginner's guide to these powerful medicines for anxiety, depression, addiction, PTSD, and expanding consciousness. Now, did you also write Beyond the Trip? Is that a separate book?
It is a separate book.
Okay, great. And then now this is your latest book, The Veteran's Guide to Psychedelics.
That's it. Exactly. Okay. You got them all three.
And you decided to give all the profits from this book to the Heroic Hearts Project. I mean, I love that, right? Because the impact we leave in this world, the good that we do, if we can work to leave everything and everyone a little better than we find them, it would make an amazing difference if we all joined in on that instead of piling on people because we disagree. So psychedelics might help you all with that. And I want Matt to talk about it. So Matt, tell us about yourself, and then we'll go into some questions about what you're noticing, what you're finding, and how it's helping.
Steve, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. Thank you for bringing these conversations to your audience.
You're welcome. I'm grateful you agreed, I love having these expanded dialogue conversations. And so I'm grateful, Matt. Thank you.
You talked about your audience. If your audience resonates with your story, I'll tell you, my quick story goes like this. I was in my 40s, not a drug user, and some friends invited me to a guided magic mushroom journey. I didn't know what magic mushrooms were. I didn't know why I was going to do this. I didn't do drugs. I'm like, well, I don't think so. They said, yeah, you want to do this. This is, you love to learn. This is a way to learn about yourself. You love to travel. This is like taking a deep adventure. Just trust us. And I did. And I went in with kind of low expectations. And in that first experience, it changed the way I look at the world. It changed the way I think. It changed the way I bring my presence, my awareness, all of it. For me, in that first journey, it starts with reconnecting with my mom, who had died when I was 22. She was 49. Wow. And she was there, and I could pull a string from her to me to my kids. I could see we're all connected, and I was carrying her forward. And all of a sudden, I had this new understanding of us being spiritual creatures having a human existence. And it was beautiful. I realized I was scared of dying young, and that wasn't my story. I realized how safe and loved I felt on this medicine, and how I didn't feel that level of safety and love in my everyday life. And I wanted to find out why. So I left that experience. I was like, what was that?
Yeah.
My instinct was to first chase the science. I went back and got a master's of science in psychology and neuroscience. And but while I was doing that, I started
Oh, wait,
traveling.
wait. Can I interrupt you there
Yeah,
for a
yeah, of
minute?
course.
The neuroscience is showing neuroplasticity, and that
Correct.
when, as people work on running their mind, new neural pathways are opened
Absolutely.
that
New
helps
pathways
them.
are formed. We enter a neuroplastic state where we can learn at a rapid pace. All sorts of good things happen.
Yeah. And so, anyway, I wanted to interrupt there because it's science supporting all of that work now. So, go ahead, tell us more about
Absolutely.
your.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was chasing the science and then
Yeah.
also traveling the world and experiencing different psychedelics by respected practitioners. Some of
Mm-hmm.
those look like MDs and PhDs,
Mm-hmm.
and some look like taitas and shaman and maestros.
Mm-hmm.
And here I
Timothy
am.
Leary in robes.
Absolutely.
He
I've
was early, right, on
he
on
was
that.
early.
Yeah.
So I've run the gauntlet a little bit for in the last little bit over 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I love this. I love what this medicine, what I tell people, and as a jumping off point for our conversation, is what I tell people psychedelics aren't a cure for anything. They are catalysts. They are catalysts to insights, awakenings, and awarenesses. And then following the catalyst, we move into integration or to practice or to spiritual group, whatever you want to call it. But that's where we make the real meaningful, lasting change. That's where we practice what we learn in these moments of clarity and we bring that to our everyday life. And that's what most of life is about. It's how do we connect with our source, our spirit, our whatever, and then how do we move through the world with that understanding.
So, was this your purpose? Did you discover your purpose through this? Was it at the door opening?
It was the door opening, without a doubt. It was
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was the portal into this where I learned where I learned that everything I'd done up until then was training for what I'm about to be doing. But let me I want to be
Sure.
very careful about this because
Yes.
there's a thing with psychedelics where people
Mm-hmm.
have a first powerful experience and they want to leap into action.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly had that pull.
Mm-hmm.
At this point in my journey, what I advise, caution when asked
Mm-hmm.
is to slow down. The impulse to help is beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
all starts here. It starts with the self. So take time, slow down, process, make sure that for me, it was important to make sure that I was rooted in this, that this wasn't a belief, it was a knowing that I
Mm-hmm.
had the enough consistent awareness and practice before I started bringing this and working with other people in this practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that slowing down is an important part of the process. So I think
What?
inspired action is wonderful, and making sure that we're sure
Yeah.
is also
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Well, was taking the master's course part of that slowing down?
It was because on the master's course was also selfish time. It was time for me just to listen and learn about what has happened in the world of psychology and psychiatry and neuroscience. Give a broad overview. Learn.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't taken a science class in like 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you read a scientific paper? What is the language that's been used? What is kind of the history of this? That's all selfish.
Yeah.
And sorry, selfish in a good way. It's all quiet learning.
Intelligently selfish.
Intelligently selfish. I'll take
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's different than, okay, I've had this experience, I've had this insight, I've had this awareness, and now I want to go and help other people. Great. That's lovely ambition. Um, and but take, in my perspective, it's to take a moment, take some time for the stillness, and then before action, spending that time in that stillness is critical. And then do the action.
Yeah. Yeah. And so your first experience included seeing your mother
Mm-hmm.
who had passed.
Yeah, 20 plus years.
Wow. And then you felt connectedness. It's like you traveled down the family tree.
It wasn't that. There were pieces
Mm-hmm.
of that. So yeah, certainly
Mm-hmm.
connected to my mom. I also
Mm-hmm.
had I mean, I don't talk about this much, but I had this this experience where just people were getting mowed down, whether that was the Holocaust or the Russian pilgrims, I'm not sure, but or pilgrims, but it was a pretty dark part of the journey. But but through that darkness, I felt connected to everything and everyone. And I think that's part of this power of these medicines is it helps me. I'm trying not to say the you because it's I don't know what it'll do for you, but for me, it reminds me that I'm not separate and apart from nature. I am nature. It reminds me that we are all connected. It reminds me that this earth and these trees and these birds and these bugs are here to support me. And I love that.
Yeah. Everything is part of whatever this creator made. And for me, I call it God. It's just simpler than trying to explain the quantum field or that, this amazing creator is not defined by anything. But so for me, it's simply God. Did you experience, now you said you confirmed to yourself that we're a spiritual being in a physical existence, a temporary physical existence. So what occurred that had you confirm that besides meeting your mother? I'm sure there were other things.
Yeah, but in that first one,
Yeah.
that would be the biggie. That would be the when she died, I had sworn off of there's no God. There's no God who would do this. There's no and I didn't have any way to process where do all spirits go and how does this possibly work? In that very first experience, I saw both that she can be here and still in just a different plane, and how we could all be here. And that was, for me, that was my first, okay, I can see this and I understand. In the time since, I've had many, many, many more experiences that have shown me that we are, again, deeply, deeply spiritual creatures. I heard a quote the other day that I really love, that that it has shown me that the reality of you is greater than the idea of you. And I love that. I love that, oh my gosh, all of us are such powerful beings, and we have been, our culture and our programming suppresses it.
Yeah.
But when we get these moments to be able to look inside and be like, wow, at our essence, we are beautiful, we are loving, we are worthy.
Yeah.
And we've made behavioral choices that we wouldn't have done had we had a different level of awareness.
Yeah.
So no bad anybody. That's where we were, and this is where we are.
Right.
And off we go. And I believe these tools, these entheogens, these psychedelics, are powerful tools for that remembrance.
So you used the word knowing when we talked, I think at the opening of this, right? So the knowing, say more about that.
There's a yoga teacher in India who talks about how it's okay to believe in God until you're 12, and then you should know. And he said it's like someone who's never seen a river, and you tell them, oh, when you get to the river, it's going to make you wet. Oh, it's wet. It's going to feel like this, but it's going to support you. You can lay back in it, and you kind of understand. But until you go to the river and you lay in the river and you feel it support you, you don't know. You believe.
Yeah.
Well, I think for many people, these tools are ways to have a direct spiritual experience, which we don't have a lot of opportunities for in our culture.
Yeah.
And for some of us, we end up having a belief that this is this ties into source and connectedness, and we might look like different waves, but we're part of the same ocean. It all ties into that. And I'm trying to be careful, Steve, a little bit with language, because I know that if I heard someone talking like this before I had my experience, that I might not have been willing to move forward, that it might sound too woo-woo. So I'm trying to back this up and say, look, you can approach this from any way you want. If you want to approach it with a diagnosis, and I'm experiencing X amount of depression or X amount of treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder, and I want to approach the medicine from that angle, beautiful. Approach it from there. You want to approach it because it's part of your sincere religious belief, as they have for thousands of years and all over the world. Approach it from there. But for me, this has become deeply spiritual, deeply impactful, and has become part of my regular ceremonial practice.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, for me, I think that I'm impressed with the knowing, number one, because it was just a knowing. I had no physical body when I had a near-death experience. For those that have listened to my podcast for 5 years, they know about it. And you mentioned something about like being a drop in the ocean. And that's what I felt like. I was one with the infinite. I was a drop in the infinite.
And that's such an incredible feeling.
Yeah. And that's where I came to the same conclusion as you, that this is a spiritual existence, and that God is never absent. The divine, the creator, the goddess, the quantum field. I mean, we're surrounded by it, and it's never absent. And because the only thing I experienced while there without a body was the now. I call it the now on steroids. There was no past or future. I couldn't even connect the events together while I was there. And it seemed like a play with a scene and a scene and a scene. And when I got back in my body, I finally could connect the events together. And I realized, wow, I had spent a lot of time either in the past or in the future and not as much time in the now. And of course, that's been the gift for me, to be in the now and to know that everything is really is God, like you said, the spirit, right? Even every bug, right. Everything here has a reason, and it's interconnected. We are all interconnected with it. All right. So now your work with veterans, talk about that.
I have learned so much in this last year. So Jesse Gould, who runs Heroic Hearts Project, reached out. He was they had just started doing treatments in Oregon, and one of the veterans had my Beyond the Trip book, and he said, "Can you make a book just for veterans, where they can learn about the different types of psychedelics, learn about how they are administered, decide whether they want to move forward or not, and if they do want to move forward, help them prepare and help them integrate." I was like, oh my God, I'd love to. And he connected me with Ken Weingard, who's a PhD and was at the VA for over 20 years and was at Healing Breakthroughs. And a person named Jared Reinhardt, who is their integration lead coach at Heroic Hearts. And we put this book together that really, I think, does a good job in helping veterans make these decisions. Towards the end of the process, they connected me with Captain Bob Kaufman. And this guy is so cool. He's a psychiatrist. He's been in the multiple deployments. Spent a lot of time working at Walter Reed, specifically at the Intrepid Center of Excellence, which is kind of like the Mayo Clinic for brain injury and concussion. And he wrote a foreword that talks about psychedelic literacy and health literacy for veterans, and how he understood that he was a typical clinician, and he has seen how these tools are just another powerful tool that can be used. So I've loved this process. I've loved getting to know the veterans. I've loved seeing the results, and seeing how transformative they can be. And I'll give you just two things here, Steve.
Sure.
So depending on what study you look at, somewhere between 17 and 44 veterans a day in America kill themselves.
Wow.
It's that big of a number. Since 9/11, I think a little bit over 7,000 service members have been killed in combat. So that's a big number. Over 30,000 veterans and service members have killed themselves. It's more than 4 times the number. And part of why this is happening is these antidepressants, the drugs most often prescribed, just don't work on enough people. So I want to slow down for a moment.
Sure.
I'm not saying they don't work. They work on some people, not enough people. So there's a group out there called MAPS, and they were studying people with treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you can imagine a veteran who's tried a bunch of drugs, antidepressants, they've tried the talk therapy and hasn't worked. They gave those people 3 sessions with a psychedelic, in this case it was MDMA,
Mm-hmm.
with therapy before and therapy after,
Mm-hmm.
72% emerged without having a PTSD diagnosis anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like the hardest group to study.
Mm-hmm.
And these psychedelics are having that type of an impact. Now, it wasn't enough for the FDA to approve it, even though it was a phase 3 trial. They want some more data. But it gives you a sense of what these tools can do
Mm-hmm.
for humans like us, where nothing
Mm-hmm.
else has worked.
Mm-hmm. And what did some of the studies show?
Yeah, they showed that the combination of the medicine with the therapy is highly effective. They showed that it can reduce or suppress the feelings of shame, blame, and guilt. And that with those feelings suppressed, those people with treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder can look at the experiences in their lives that caused them
Mm-hmm.
or that led to
Mm-hmm.
this, and they could re-change the narrative. So this is something that's so different. In Western society, we take medicines, we're like, oh, you're going to cure us medicine. Again,
Yeah.
psychedelics aren't cures, they're catalysts.
Yeah.
So in psychedelics, it can suppress your shame, blame, and guilt, and it can put you into a frame of mind, but you're going to have to do the work. It's going to show you the story. Instead of numbing and hiding the pain, it's going to bring it up close, where you can discover it, you can understand it, and then you can transform it.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's coming from you. And that's the power of the psychedelic. It's that somatic knowing, I've changed my story. It doesn't change the past. It doesn't bring back people we've lost, but it helps us find more meaning in the present.
Yeah. Well, and then you mentioned something on your own experience that it gave you a whole new perspective. It expanded what you thought was previously true and found more. We're not going to say it wasn't true, but we'll just say you found more. You found a new way to look at it. And when I think of listeners, most haven't been probably on the battlefield and or lost a limb and or maybe treated people in a medical tent who were coming off the battlefield, right? So you can't just say they were in combat and got PTSD. Sometimes just being in the military and fulfilling your role would lead to that. I'm not a veteran. I did have family members that were in for a long time in various branches of the service. So then what was the difference for you and how does that translate for other people? Because you looked at your life totally differently from what you told me early on.
I love what you're doing here in that this message we're talking. So yes, we have the Veterans Guide to Psychedelics, but this message isn't just for veterans.
Right.
And I think when we compare anything, comparison is the death of happiness. So if I compare my trauma to your trauma, it doesn't matter. These are the things that impacted me. These are the things that impacted you. And that's how you got there and I got here.
Yeah.
These tools for thousands of years have been used to help people become the best version of them. Not become, that's actually the wrong language, to remember who they are. So yes, if you're listening to this and you're not a veteran, you don't know human goes through life unscathed. We all have our things. And these tools are ways to help us move through. For me, I'll just try the me. It's helped me remember who I am so that I can move through the world with less suffering, period.
Yeah.
And I love that. My teacher always like, suffering is optional. And it's so right.
Yeah.
You talked about living in the past and living in the future. That's the home of suffering.
Yeah.
We're living in the present.
Yeah.
Pretty beautiful world.
Yeah. The Buddha said that too, right? The root of desire is the root of all suffering, right? That we don't get what we want. And Christ, of course, in some of the Gospels, I think in Proverbs was that everything works together for good. I'm not going to read the whole proverb. I have it in my book, Sage Advice, that I wrote a couple of years ago, where I did research on a whole bunch of wisdom for thousands and thousands of years, included even some modern day people that are still living. And then the thing that stuck with me about all of that is Muhammad also said, what reaches you was never meant to miss you. And what misses you was never meant to reach you. and we have all that advice, and yet it just bounces off like a wild basketball shot. It bounces off our backboard of belief, and it doesn't rebound back into our hands so that we can maybe score, we can dunk it. It just it's a journey. There's work. So do psychedelics help with that journey? Does self-awareness change? Does, you know, what are you finding about that?
I love that Muhammad quote. I think that's beautiful. I've heard variations on that, and I think that's so true. I try to take notes and I try to pay attention, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, did I get all of that? Versus just trusting in the universe. That, like Mickey Singer says,
Mm-hmm.
surrender to the universe. It's gonna
Mm-hmm.
be okay.
Mm-hmm.
What you're meant to hear, you're gonna hear. What you're not
Mm-hmm.
meant to hear, you're not going to. It's gonna be okay. It
Yeah.
is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we have 50 years, I was in my 40s, I guess, 40 some years of programming.
Mm-hmm.
This tool was a way for me to unpack a lot in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
As an initial unpacking, and then to show me, oh, you can go over here, you can go over there, you can go here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think all the work since then has helped reinforce it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think these tools can bring incredible amounts of awareness and understanding in a relatively short period of time.
So Marcus Bach wrote about serendipity. He wrote about the Prince of Serendip. And his message in there was that when we're awake, not a religious awake, but in the moment awake, just appreciating everything that shows up, looking with gratitude around, maybe even around your desk or your office with a different perspective, that serendipity shows up, which I think that we probably miss it because we're so much in our head that it's always there, right? So do new doors open because an awareness is exchanged with a former run by past programming? Now there's a new appreciation of every moment in life. Have you noticed things, doors opening that surprised you?
Yeah, doors open, and then every challenging situation we get to look at and say, is it a barrier or a doorway? They're all doorways.
Yeah.
As long as we get to still breathe and be alive, they're all
Yeah.
doorways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, for me, surrendering to this process has led to more abundance than I've ever had in my life. And surrendering to this process has led to more love and community than I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
To surrendering to the inefficiency
Yeah.
of having time for relationship and community,
Yeah.
and not just trying to work in every 15-minute interval across the day has made it, for me, a much richer life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned the surrender experiment. I was presuming that, right? Mickey Singer. Did you meet him? Have you met?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is that why you call him Mickey?
I thought that's what he goes by. Does
Oh,
he go by
okay.
Michael?
I don't know. I didn't meet him. I don't know. I can't say that. I've read his work. I love his work. I actually listened to Living the Surrender Experiment. I think it was. I listened to that a few times a year, and I also listened to the Surrender Experiment because his path is just amazing, as you know. So
he's such a cool character. He's got his Temple of Light down there in Gainesville that he built, I think, in the 70s, and anyone can go for free.
Yeah.
And he speaks, I think, 3 nights a week, and then he does his morning practice. It's super. I mean, it's 6:30 or 7 a.m. every day.
So you've been there at the
absolutely.
temple. Wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right, that's on my bucket list.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great thing to do. It's a great and my encouragement there is give it a few days. Go for not just the night he's speaking, but go for one of the morning things. And it's so lovely.
Yeah. Become a part-time visitor of the community.
Exactly.
Or move to Gainesville.
But you don't have to do that. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of this. And that's what I think he's demonstrating. He's living. Like, this is his practice. If you want to come be a part of his practice, be a part of his practice. Yeah. If you don't want to be a part of it, don't be a part of it.
Yeah.
It's not Yeah, it's whatever you choose to do, you choose to do.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there that to unpack. One is um, you could think that life is happening to you, or you could think that life is happening for you. Was it easier after your experience to see gratitude, find gratitude, or see that how important gratitude was? Because I can tell you, let's see, Ben Franklin called it, if you're, I got my quote on the wall. I should remember it, but a person all wrapped up in themselves makes a very small bundle. I was a very small bundle until I was 50.
I heard a spiritual teacher ask this question that I thought was just really well put. She asked, do I have a devotional, or does anyone have a devotional relationship to life or a transactional relationship?
Yeah, that was it.
And
Yeah.
I think we all have the ability to decide for ourselves what it's going to be.
Yeah.
In my experience, the things that are transactional are the things that are short-lived and non-satisfying. It just the
Yeah.
goalpost moves.
Yeah.
I've loved living this devotional where, oh my goodness, 9
Yeah.
trillion things had to happen for me to be alive right now.
Yeah.
How lucky am I to be alive right now?
Yeah.
Period. And let's see what
Yeah.
else happens.
Yeah. Well, Michael Singer says that too, right? It took 13 point. Don't forget that it took 13.8 billion years to get to this exact moment. It's amazing, right?
It is
Yeah.
amazing. It is amazing. And I think that coupled with this notion that none of us are broken. There's nothing to
Yeah.
fix.
Yeah.
We just need to remember how powerful we are.
Yeah.
And then that we already have everything we need. And I
Yeah.
know that sounds, for those, again, I can understand how woo-woo that sounds. I get it. I
Yeah.
hear it.
Yeah.
And what a feeling, what a place of power to operate from.
Yeah. Well, Einstein, when he was asked his ideas of God, he would answer two ways. One is he'd say, well, the superior reasoning power that created this unimaginable universe forms my idea of God. Mm-hmm. The second way he would answer it was very abrupt in a way, because I'm sure I wasn't there to ask him the question, but it's been reported people, when they asked him, what's your idea of God? He would also answer, read the God of Spinoza. And so I encourage people to read that. And whether you decide to experiment with creating a new pathway for maybe your anxiety, your depression, your sadness, your PTSD, read that too before you maybe take a pathway with Heroic Hearts Project or any of the other projects that are out there. That there's a lot of people more people, right, that are doing the guided psychedelic experiences, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways, from legal ketamine in all 50 states to
I didn't know that. All 50
yeah.
states now. There's
all
legal
50
ketamine.
States you can access ketamine, which is technically not a psychedelic. It's a dissociative anesthetic, but the experience is so
What is the
similar.
difference? What is a dissociated?
So ketamine was what came out of was really developed as an anesthesia. So it was called the buddy drug in Vietnam. There's, I don't know, 20,000 papers on its safety. We studied it a lot. But if you take it at this sub-anesthetic dose, it can drop you into a non-ordinary state of consciousness where you can have many of the types of experiences that people have on the classic psychedelics, things like mushrooms and LSD and ayahuasca. It's shorter, but again, it's legal, and for some people, that's super important. What I'll tell your listeners is it's definitely a buyer beware, and I'll leave you with one thing on this.
Yeah.
There are ketamine providers where you'll go and they'll hook you up to an IV. They'll give you your ketamine. You'll have your journey. You'll finish it up. They'll let you recover, and they send you home. And those providers believe that the ketamine is just a pure biochemical experience. 100% legal. That's what they do. There's other providers who are going to say, whoa. Let's do some preparation. Why are you here? Let's set intentions. When you come in, they'll still hook you up to an IV or maybe a shot, but they'll give you a blanket and an eye mask and a playlist, and they'll have a whole process around the journey. And then following the journey, they're going to say, let's spend some time not today, but let's spend some time afterwards integrating what happened.
Yeah, I
And
like
those
that.
people ideologically believe it's a biochemical, psychosocial,
Mm-hmm.
spiritual process.
Mm-hmm.
The pricing is not that different.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's again, it's what do you want as a consumer? What do you want on your journey? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one way that psychedelics are meeting people in America.
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelic churches are another. There's somewhere between, I don't know, 500 and 1,000 psychedelic churches in America. It's a big
Wow.
number.
Wow.
And then there's a lot of underground coaches and therapists working with psychedelics. And then a lot of people are flying, like our veterans are flying to Central America and South America to experience it. Jamaica has a lot of psychedelic retreat centers, Brazil,
Mm-hmm.
Colombia,
And
Netherlands.
they're using ayahuasca or mushrooms or
It ranges. Mexico and Jamaica are mushrooms.
mm-hmm.
Costa Rica is mostly either mushrooms or ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
Peru and Brazil is mostly ayahuasca. It just depends on
Mm-hmm.
where their people are going. The Netherlands uses truffles, which is the mushroom family.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it just depends on where you go. But the questions to ask, and I dive deep into
Yeah,
this
I
in the
think this
Veterans
is a
Guide.
good place to go right here. The questions
Yeah,
to
the
ask.
questions
Yeah.
to ask are the same. How
Mm-hmm.
much experience do you have?
Yeah.
What do you do when things don't go the way you want them to? How are
Yeah.
you going to help me prepare? How do you keep me safe? How many people are in the room? What are the rules to being in this space?
Yeah.
Um, how do you what do you do afterwards? What if someone has a challenging experience? Then what happens?
Mm-hmm.
The same questions are asked, and for no matter which one you're picking. But the
Mm-hmm.
simple way to think about this is source, set, setting. Where did your drugs
Source,
come?
set,
Set and
setting.
setting.
Yeah.
Source is where did your drugs come from? So
Yeah.
make sure they're pure. Set is what are you going to do for my mindset? And setting is how do you control the physical environment?
Mm-hmm. Meaning, what's it like?
Meaning,
How many people will be around you?
exactly. How many people are gonna be around you? What's the what's the what are the rules to engagement? Is there gonna be music or not music?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all
Did
those types of questions.
Did you have an ayahuasca experiment there?
I've done ayahuasca a number of times. I had the last time though was with a group of veterans for a
Mm-hmm.
week in Peru where
Mm-hmm.
we did 3 different ayahuasca ceremonies over the
Mm-hmm.
course of a week.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's beautiful. I love.
Is that traditional 3 or some come have one, or is it multi?
Most ayahuasca centers you're going to go and do no less than 2 and maybe 4 or 5.
Oh, okay.
3 is a good number if you're there for like a 5-day
Mm-hmm.
experience ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Part of so this is actually a good thing for your listeners too. I like at least 2, and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
When someone comes to a retreat, to a ceremony, to a therapist, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to do their one pick your flavor psilocybin journey,
Mm-hmm.
they put so much pressure on themselves. I have to get everything out of this because this is my one time, and what if it doesn't work? And oh my goodness,
Oh my God.
when you have 2 or 3 sessions in a row or maybe one day apart,
Mm-hmm.
it takes that pressure off. And then what I've seen is when that pressure is off, people are able to go deeper on that first one
Mm-hmm.
than if they just had the one ceremony booked. So I think that's a good practice.
Well, they also then have a baseline, a comparison, because they have more than one, and they can, in their mind, look at, well, what happened with the first one? Here's what happened with the second one. Here's what happened with the third one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And and you also have the ability to like, okay, I did this, and now I came up for air. I got my feet back on the ground. I saw that I can do this, and now I want to dive back in and go deeper.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful and really a beautiful process.
Albie wants to go on a trip.
I see the dog's ready to do it.
I think he likes the topic. Hold on, let me let him out.
That's perfect.
That dog loves me. And dog is God spelled backwards.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I know that. I have a cat too, so I'm not discriminating on pets. I'm not. I love animals. Okay, so what would you say to people about the veterans guide, right? If they know veterans, I mean, is this something that the listeners could say, "Hey, I want you to read this"?
It really is, and I'm not. Again, I don't make $1 off of this. All the money goes to Heroic Hearts
I
Project.
love that. Yeah.
I actually like this because if you just read the first, I don't know, third of the book, that's really about whether you want to even do this or not. So whether it's for you and you're listening and I'm debating using psychedelics, great. Or someone you love, it gives them enough information to make an informed decision or start to make an informed decision on whether this might be a tool that they want to implement in their lives. And then if they choose to move forward, regardless of who they pick to work with, there's great activities in here that they are taking the responsibility for their own preparation and their own integration. And then they can supplement that with whatever their provider offers. So I think this is a good practical guide for people considering it. Period.
Is there some of the research too that's in the book?
There is. We talk about that MDMA study. We talk about there's so much good research. We're in the middle of from a research perspective, a psychedelic renaissance. There's over 200 universities studying psychedelics right now.
Are there any approved programs in the United States where people could go for a retreat or no? Not yet.
There's only ketamine is your only legal option in the United States. Unless you get into a clinical trial somewhere.
Why are we so far behind in that, do you think, Matt?
Steve, we've had 50 years of prohibition. So I didn't know we were in a prohibition, but we've been in a prohibition since the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. Before that, we had a couple thousand years where the church and the state didn't really love psychedelics. We had where there's the Spaniards coming here to the New World and finding the indigenous people using psychedelics, and they try to quash that. There were psychedelics in Africa and India and all through Scandinavia, Siberia, Europe.
All kinds of countries.
All over the world for thousands of years.
Well, our Native Americans, I'm sure, had their own experiences, right, through mushrooms or different plants and
peyote.
Peyote.
So we've had so we've been suppressing it. We've had this prohibition, and now we have science on one hand saying, let's look at psilocybin. It's both non-toxic and non-addictive. We have that reaching the press. We have that reaching the books. We have that reaching popular culture, and people are saying, okay, I get it now. It's not too much of a leap then to understand how this group might be using it for religious purposes, and this group might be using it for medicinal purposes. So we're getting there. I'm very optimistic, Steve, that we're going to continue to find ways for people to access these tools and reduce risk. And I think we're entering into a time where
I think it is time
that will happen.
Now, you mentioned it's not addictive. Now, what about people that are addicted to other substances? Is it recommended they not take a trip if they're addicted to alcohol or cocaine or heroin or, fentanyl? I don't know what people become addicted to because I had other things. I was addicted to crazy thinking and a few other things, but never drugs.
So this is a funny question. Bill W., the guy who started Alcoholics Anonymous, he wanted LSD to be part of their protocol.
Wow.
In his language, he's like the first step in his 12-step program is recognizing that there's a higher power.
Right. Yeah.
In his language, he wrote about how, drunks have a hard time doing that. And LSD is a way to force a spiritual experience on them.
I love that idea.
There, they would be able to move through the rest of the steps. So there has been a lot of research for people with alcohol use challenges in psychedelics that have shown great promise. And in the 70s, 60s and 70s here in America, it was part of the protocol. We had a number of organizations using LSD for alcohol. Lately, we're seeing like Johns Hopkins has been studying smokers with using psilocybin, using the active ingredient in those magic mushrooms I was talking about. And they're finding it more than twice as effective as the best thing on the market.
Wow.
and then for people who have a heroin addiction or opioid addiction, there's nothing that's proven to be as effective as Iboga, or Ibogaine would be the synthetic version of Iboga. Now that particular psychedelic, of all the psychedelics I've talked about, it has a cardiac profile. It can be more dangerous.
Okay.
So that's definitely one to do very cautiously with medical, in my opinion, medical oversight, unless you're going to Africa and doing it as part of a ceremony. But it's but
might be your last ceremony.
It could be your last ceremony, but but it's showing to be very, very effective.
So
and then but I know it's counterintuitive to, like, okay, I'm having a substance use challenge. Why isn't it like, now I'm going to use this other medicine? But when we do, like when you give psilocybin mushrooms to rats, they're not showing any addictive potential that they would choose psilocybin over food. You give cocaine to a rat, they're going to choose cocaine over food.
Yeah.
So
I had a friend that tried it once. This was 30 years ago. And the next day he called me, Steve, you got to help me. I'm driving around looking for more stuff. I said, you're kidding. He had it once. Well, so anyway, yeah. I just wonder about what's it going to take to get us up to speed as a country? Who does the audience speak to? Where are we going to get this conversation into mainstream? Because, I think my journey is no one else's business, and everyone else's journey is none of my business. And I don't think government has a place in any of our bodies, as long as there are some boundaries, right? Like you pointed out, having who's going to be around us, what's the place like, what's their philosophy, do they have medical attention on board? I mean, there are some common sense questions, but I think most humans would ask it. Not all, probably. So what is it? What's the conversation that has to be had?
I like this because it's really multiple conversations. On one hand, we need a conversation with our Food and Drug Administration to talk about, we need another option for mental health in America. We need an option that's not about numbing symptoms, but getting to the root and getting through it.
Well, and years ago, we warehoused people, which my father was a chef at the Connecticut Valley Hospital in Middletown, Connecticut. It was one of the largest campuses in the country. And I've had friends that I moved up to the North Shore of Boston and had friends that worked at the Danvers State Hospital. And back years and years ago, we just shut people away. It's like we didn't know they existed. And then, of course, all those places were closed and people were released into society. And so we need some place in the middle. And I think these kind of treatments would help a lot of people, and not forcing them to go to Costa Rica or Africa or Mexico, wherever they have, right? Let's create an industry.
Yeah. And recognizing the meanness of that, Steve. So we talk about, there's an organization out there called Decriminalize Nature. And I thought it was like a libertarian organization, because part of what they say is that no adult should tell another adult that they can't put nature in their body. So I get that now. I understand that. But the other thing that they say, which I did not understand, is this is about access. For those of us who are privileged, who have resources, we can find psychedelic retreats. We can fly to other places. We have options.
Right.
But the fact that I can do that for me and my family, what about someone else who is having an aging parent dying and wants to heal using a psychedelic? Should they not have the right to grow mushrooms in their backyard or in their closet and use that? So I think that's an important point that I didn't get. It's a big deal.
Who do we speak to, though? Is it going to be a congressional? FDA. Let's go back over that.
Let's continue the government.
I'm making notes.
Pressure to reach the FDA to change our laws around drugs would be number one. And
is it even a conversation in Congress, though? For example, it is starting.
And it's a conversation at three different levels. There are these conversations happening at the city level or local level. We're seeing city after city decriminalizing psychedelics. It's a conversation at the state level. So the entire state of Oregon and the entire state of Colorado has found a way to add
I didn't know that. That's great.
and then it's a conversation at the federal level. So starting with FDA, which would be about the drugs, and then starting with the DEA. Oh, sorry, one more thing on the FDA. Right now, these drugs are Scheduled 1, meaning there's no medicinal use, there's high risk of addiction,
But
and
that's not
harm.
true, right?
And it's just not true.
Wow.
So they need to be rescheduled. Second set of discussion is with our DEAs, that right now there has not been a church in America that's been able to get a federal exemption without suing the government. And none. So there is technically
And what would they get an exemption for? What are they?
To be allowed to use these tools as a sacrament, as part of a sincere religious belief. So, for example, the Native American church is allowed to legally use peyote as part of their ceremony. The UDV ayahuasca church can use ayahuasca. The Church of Eagle and Condor can use ayahuasca. But there's only 4 churches in America that have this exemption. So we need
we are backwards.
DEA. We're backwards a little bit, but we're getting there. We need the DEA to please come up with a process and a set of guidelines that can be followed, so that if a church can show sincere religious belief, they can show that they're not diverting, they can show risk reduction, they can show that the sacrament they use is non-toxic and non-addictive, that they're not doing mail order drugs, that they make a checklist of things that are important, and that so that when a church is compliant, that they can operate legally in America, which allows that church to have medical people on site, where the medical people aren't afraid of losing their licenses.
Of course. And is the result that people are buying them from Vinny on the street corner?
Yeah, there's more of that than.
And are they safe buying them that way?
Well, that gets into that. Yeah, when we talk about the harm with these medicines, real harm can happen when drugs are laced or contaminated.
Yeah.
So we need, in my opinion, to bring all of this above ground where we can see it, we can tax it,
put some boundaries around it. Yeah.
Put some
common sense boundaries, right?
Common sense boundaries.
Yeah. Maybe even certified providers and people that are there to guide people through the experience, right? Different levels. So, yeah, common sense is missing on some of these issues. Yeah. Well, it's been fascinating having this dialogue with you. And I what would you like to leave people with? And then I'm going to ask you to report how people can reach you, and we'll say it a few times, and get your book, et cetera, et cetera. But what would you like to leave everybody with?
I think what's been resonating with me this week is that line we talked about earlier, but the reality of you is greater than the idea of you.
Yes.
And that these tools can help us see who we are, remember who we are. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And that these tools aren't for everybody.
Yeah.
That there's the difference between medicine and poison is dose. And there's people on different prescriptions and supplements that need to be careful. Yeah. And all of that kind of information is in books like The Veteran's Guide and Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind and Carl Hart's Drug Use for Grown-Ups. There's lots of information out there.
And your book.
And my book.
And
the
your
Veteran's
books.
Guide and books. Yeah, the Psychedelic.
Psychedelics
for everyone. If people
and Beyond the Trip is another one, right?
That's a great workbook for people who just want the activities. My books are on Amazon. The Psychedelics for Everyone's on Audible. MattZemon.com. If you want to buy bulk books, if you're working at a treatment center or with private practice or retreat center, people buy my books at 100 at a time.
And that's Matt, MattZemon.com, folks. MATT, Matt. You might be experiencing something, so I have to spell it. Matt Zemon, ZEMON.com. And then are there other things that you wanted to mention before you close out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm active on Instagram and LinkedIn. I love bringing this knowledge. If you have a group or somebody who you want to have learn about this, I love going and speaking at different places and being able to spread this information. And again, not saying this is for everyone to actually take, not saying that these are safe, but talking about how do we reduce risk and how do we understand what these things are whether we're using medically or spiritually or
if
anything
Timothy
between.
Leary hadn't experienced LSD, we wouldn't have the book, What Do Women Want? Which he wrote.
Was that
one of his books, and I have it here. It's actually on my shelf. I bought one
of
it
a good book?
It was actually signed by his girlfriend. I think her name was Joanne. Yeah, I actually had a signed copy by him, but I gave it away to somebody who was so fascinated. They were so excited that you love it so much, right? Yeah, I mean, imagine what he went through and what it cost him.
Mm-hmm.
Because he ended up not being at Harvard.
He did not, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so Matt Zemon. Now, what about the Heroic Hearts Project and the Veterans Guide and that they're getting all the profits from it? So just talk a few minutes about that.
Anyone who buys the Veterans Guide on Amazon or through me directly in bulk, all the proceeds go to Heroic Hearts Project.
That's beautiful.
If you're looking for a place to donate, heroicheartsproject.org. It's such a great group.
.org.
They basically say to veterans, look, we'll fly you to Central America, South America, or Oregon, or Mexico, and we'll handle everything. And if you can't pay $1, you don't pay $1. It's okay.
Wow.
They give them therapy, both individual and group before, and treatment afterwards. And they really work hard to make sure these experiences become catalysts for real, meaningful, lasting change. And I love this organization. Heroic Hearts Project is the one I'm working with. If you're looking for more, there's one called the Mission Within. There's another one called VETS. All of these nonprofits are these.
And what was the other one? The Mission Within, and what was the other one?
VETS.
VETS.
These nonprofits are stepping up as to fill in where the VA is falling short on this particular topic. And I'm optimistic that the VA, I mean, they just signed a $1.5 million research bill, and they're working on it. We're working on it. But it's just not happening. We're having, again, we go back to that 18 to 44 people, veterans killing themselves every day. It's too many.
It's way too many.
We need to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
Slow that down.
Yeah. And how many people do you think Heroic Hearts have helped that couldn't go on their own, do you think?
I think last year alone, they sent, I think, 300 some veterans down for these programs.
Wow.
I mean, it's tremendously expensive. I think it's about $6,000 per veteran. So in terms of how much do they have to raise to be able to do this, so it doesn't cost the veterans. And they also, one more thing, the Veterans Project also works with military spouses. So it's not just the veteran. We talk about the impact of PTSD.
Because the spouse is impacted.
Yeah. So they're working with the spouses as well. So I think the Heroic Hearts was over 300 veterans, and then their project, I think it's called the Hope Project, worked with the spouses, and it's those together are incredible organizations, and I can't recommend donating enough to either one of those. Yeah.
HeroicHeartsProject.org, folks. If you can give $6,000, you get one veteran.
There you go.
To an experience, and maybe if you give 12, their spouse can also have the same experience.
Exactly.
I would imagine, we can't imagine if we haven't been in the battlefield or haven't been enlisted in the services. And my brothers have, some of my brothers, and I know what they went through. Because I had one brother do two tours of duty in Vietnam, and he was impacted. There was no doubt about it. So I'm grateful I didn't have to. I had a high draft number. I had a 352, I think, out of 365, my twin brother and I. So I didn't have to go, and my twin brother volunteered. So for me, it wasn't a fit, and I'm glad. If I had been drafted, I would have gone. That's the kind of guy I am. But I got 352 for a lottery number back in 1952. I was born 18, so 62, 1970, the year I graduated from high school. Right, that was my draft number. So
amazing,
folks. MattZemon.com. Go buy his books. If you've got a veteran friend, go get the Veterans Guide to Psychedelics or donate to Heroic Hearts Projects. And what I love about this conversation is my work is about helping people expand from small-minded thinking, recognizing that their brain will gather evidence to prove it's true, on something they put into their brain, right? Without regard for anything, evidence outside of the contrary, right? That will disprove their thought. It's called confirmation bias in science. And Dr. James Doty wrote in his book, Mind Magic. Now, he's a neuroscience. He started out as a brain surgeon, which led him to be curious. And now he's a neuroresearcher and a metaphysician, I might say. Go get the book. You'll be fascinated. What he talks about is the brain has a file system and a bloodhound. He talks about the subconscious has a file system and a bloodhound. And whatever you put in the file system, the bloodhound goes to gather evidence to prove it's true. It's like if you gave the bloodhound my shirt and said, go find Matt, it couldn't do it. It would find me, right? If you gave it the shirt and said, go find Steve, it would exclude that, hey, Matt is also on the trail. Maybe Steve's with him. It would exclude any evidence to the contrary. Our brains need to be stretched by us. We program our mind, and we've got to look at all the places, the gifts of all the places where we're closed-minded is actually life itself urging us to reconsider it. That life is happening for us, not to us. And that when we get over doing anything for outside recognition, money, and all those things are fine. It's just we're living from the outside in. When we live from the inside out, that we're going to find a way to love one person as much as the creator of the universe loves us, at least in my experience, my near-death experience, and to leave everything and everyone a little better than we find them. Think the energy of that. And then to challenge all these places where we say, you shouldn't do that. Don't do that. That's not good for you. It's none of our business. We need to let people decide for themselves and with the proper boundaries. And that's what Matt just talked about in this podcast. So different thinking for different times, and consider getting the book, The Veteran's Guide to Psychedelics, and or to heroicheartsproject.org. Go dig in your pocket and do something that makes you very uncomfortable, and be generous, because it's giving, by the way, that starts everything, not getting. If you've got the attitude about, I'm going to get this, you might find a whole new level of happiness by giving, because you'll be amazed at what returns to you. But you got to prove that to yourself. Don't take my word for anything. And don't take Matt's word for anything. Prove it to yourself. Go start doing some research. Buy his books and prove it to yourself. Maybe take one quick trip and have an experience that scares the hell out of your mind, because that is when you start to take over, when you bounce beyond what makes your little brain uncomfortable. Actually, that's why it's urging you to stay safe. It's actually inviting you to go beyond that spot. Matt, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you just to leave your window open for a few minutes, because the way Riverside works, the download won't count. Okay, you got it. All right, and I will edit all this stuff out. But I'm grateful, Matt. Thank you so much for the time.
Bye-bye.